Hey, tonight we're going to talk about what sex was really like in medieval times. Not the candlelit courtly romance they show in movies, but the raw, unvarnished truth scrawled in old church records and whispered in confessions. Imagine living in a cold, smoky cottage with the local priest asking exactly how you did it so he could assign penance. We'll wander brothels that paid taxes to the king, watch public penances in freezing squares, and listen in on humiliating annulment trials where neighbours testified about your wedding night performance. Spoiler: medieval sex wasn't glamorous, it was regulated, fined, and judged. Yet people still found ways to be very, very human. If you're into these weird, slightly grim bedtime histories, I'd love if you hit like or subscribe. And seriously, I'm always curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your city or what time it is there. It's oddly comforting knowing we're all drifting off together, imagining the sound of old floorboards creaking and the hush of secrets kept behind heavy wooden doors. You stand at the edge of a medieval village square somewhere in 14th century France. The church bells have just stopped ringing. A crowd gathers, not for mass, but for a wedding, followed by what they call bedding. A peasant couple has been married just minutes ago. You trail behind them as they're escorted to their home, a single room built of timber and packed earth. The entire village pours in behind them, neighbours, cousins, even the priest. There's no privacy in peasant life, and no exception is made for a marriage bed. You sit quietly by the hearth, watching as women undress the bride, giggling and praying. The men do the same to the groom. A few drunken uncles shout inappropriate blessings, candles flicker. The mattress is a thin sack stuffed with straw and mice. Then comes the awkward moment everyone has been waiting for, the bedding ceremony. Depending on the region, the witnesses may stay in the room or just outside the door, listening closely. It's not a dirty curiosity, they'll say. It's legal assurance. A marriage must be consummated to count. A pair of relatives might even touch the sheets later, ensuring no deception took place. You wonder how many of these couples were strangers until that morning. Marriage in the Middle Ages was rarely about love. It was livestock exchanged, dowries negotiated, fields combined. Later, if the bride becomes pregnant too soon, suspicions rise. If she doesn't conceive after years, whispers follow. Women are blamed first. Men are sent to drink boiled weasel parts to fix their seed. In the flickering light, you watch the nervous couple lie under their blanket, faces red. The door closes. Someone leans in to hear. It's hard to sleep knowing your neighbours are waiting for you to make noise. The custom will fade in time, but not quickly. In some places, even kings are not exempt. Henry IV of France was paraded to his marriage, bed by a train of nobles. In others, the priest himself blesses the bed with holy water, pausing to suggest certain positions are more pious. You lie back and imagine it, your first night as husband or wife, under straw, with the village watching, and you realise privacy in the medieval world is a luxury no one can afford. You sit in a monastery scriptorium in England around the year 1260. Candlelight flickers against the vellum pages. A monk dips his quill in iron gall ink. He is not copying scripture tonight. He's writing about sex, not how to do it, how not to. You lean over his shoulder as he scribbles out warnings in Latin and scowling Middle English. Too much pleasure is sin, he writes, even in marriage. In his view, and the view of the church, sex is acceptable only for procreation. If you do it for fun, even with your spouse, it is a venial sin. If you enjoy it a lot, you might as well confess the same as if you'd stolen a horse. You blink slowly. The monk has compiled a list of forbidden positions. On top, probably a mortal sin. From behind, that's how animals do it. God frowns upon it. Only face to face, quietly, with no laughter or affection. No unnatural acts. Even kissing too much beforehand might lead to damnation. You glance over at the monastery garden. Somewhere out there, a married couple is trying to conceive while navigating this minefield of guilt. Confessors were trained to ask difficult questions. Did you lie with your wife while she was pregnant? One manual inquires. Did you enjoy it? Another presses. One 13th century confessor's guide even lays out how often is acceptable. Twice a week is excessive. Once a week is tolerable. Sundays? Absolutely not. Lent? No. Advent? Certainly not. Feast days? Never. By the end of the calendar, fewer than 100 days remain, and that's if your partner isn't menstruating, pregnant, nursing, or just tired. You look back at the monk. He has added a note. Sex is tolerated, not celebrated. The irony isn't lost on you. The scribes who warn against lust have no first-hand experience, but they write with absolute certainty. Meanwhile, in the village below, couples laugh under tattered blankets. They sin quietly and repent just as quietly. You close your eyes and imagine trying to follow every rule. Sex in this world is like walking a tightrope with your soul on the line. You wonder, did anyone ever get it exactly right? And if they did, was it any good? You stand beneath a swinging wooden sign marked with a crude red glove. The year is 1357. You're in the Southwark district of London, just over the Thames from the city proper. Here, sin is not only expected, it's regulated. This is a brothel, and yes, it's legal. A bailiff from the Bishop of Winchester walks past you, jingling keys at his waist. You're told the church owns the building. The bishop collects the rent. The women who work here are known as Winchester geese. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, ale, and the sharp perfume of rosemary water. The floor is packed earth, littered with rushes and broken straw. You hear laughter upstairs, but it doesn't sound joyful. You're ushered past a stained tapestry into a room where a girl no older than 17 sits with her hands folded. She's required to wear a striped hood so everyone knows her trade. She's allowed to work only within Southwark. If caught in the city itself, she'll be fined or whipped. She's not allowed to live with a man, not allowed to own fine clothes, not allowed to keep her wages if the landlord decides he needs a new door hinge. Yet here, she is safer than in unlicensed quarters. She's checked by physicians, though their methods are questionable. If she has signs of illness, she's banned for a week, then examined again. The laws are strict. No fighting, no thievery, no pressuring the customers, no keeping secrets. A man may request your company, a woman may not refuse. Upstairs, the beds are small and lumpy. No locks on the doors. You wonder how many noblemen have visited in secret, cloaked in night and guilt. You hear that across the Channel in France. The authorities are even more methodical. Each girl is registered. Each house pays tax. One city official writes that prostitution is necessary to protect good women. It's always framed that way, not as pleasure, but containment, an ugly necessity. Later, you watch the bailiff leave with a pouch of coins. He walks toward the bishop's residence without shame. Outside, a preacher screams that fire will rain down on this place, but the city quietly lets it continue. You look up at the red glove again. It swings in the breeze, marking a place of sorrow, of survival, and of strange medieval pragmatism. And you wonder, what kind of salvation was paid for with this rent? You're crouched in a dark cottage near Bologna, sometime in the early 1400s. It smells of boiling wine, burnt feathers, and damp moss. A woman is giving birth, and a midwife is in charge. You glance toward the window. No men are allowed inside. Not husbands, not priests, not doctors. This world is women's work, messy, painful, sacred, and suspicious. The midwife hums as she rubs an oily balm across the labouring woman's stomach. It's made of goose fat and marjoram. She mutters a prayer, not Latin, but a half-pagan chant passed down orally. In one pocket, she carries sage and iron nails. In another, dried snake skin. If the baby is breech, she turns the mother to face east and ties red thread around her wrist. You're told she knows things the doctors don't. Which herbs make you bleed, which ones make you stop, which potions bring on early labour, and which stop a child from ever arriving. But knowledge is dangerous, especially for a woman. Later, in the same town, this very midwife will be called before the bishop's court. She'll be asked whether she ever caused a miscarriage, whether she knew charms, whether she baptized infants who died too early. You watch her answer calmly, voice steady. She's seen more births than the bishop ever will. Elsewhere in Europe, midwives are licensed by city councils. In Spain, they must swear to report unwed mothers. In Germany, they're forbidden from whispering secret prayers. In England, they face arrest if they fail to call a priest in time for baptism. But in practice, they walk a quiet line between folk healer and suspect sorceress. You leaf through a medieval medical text. Male physicians write about the womb as if it's a furnace. They debate how a woman's cold, wet body creates imperfect children. One suggests that if a man's seed is too weak, the child will be female. Another recommends rabbit brains to increase fertility. And yet, when birth is real, bloody and urgent, it is the midwife they call. You watch her clean the baby with warm milk. She ties a charm to the cradle. The priest might call it superstition. The father might never know, but the child sleeps safely tonight. And you marvel at how many lives were shaped by the secret wisdom of women in the margins. You push open a wooden door and step into the rising steam. The scent hits first, sweet oils, old sweat, and singed linen. You're in a bathhouse in 13th century Prague, and business is booming. In medieval Europe, bathing was more common than you think. Public bathhouses served as the local spa, washroom, and social hub, but they also gained a reputation for other things. You sit on a bench wrapped in damp wool. Nearby, a couple laughs too loudly. A bathmaid pours warm water over their shoulders. There are partitions, but they're thin. Candles glow behind gauzy curtains. You ask the attendant if this is normal. She shrugs. Depends on the time of day. In Paris, city records show that bathhouses were often attached to taverns or inns. Men and women could bathe together. Towels were optional. It wasn't long before authorities took notice. By the 1300s, church leaders began issuing warnings. Some bathhouses were ordered to hang signs stating no indecency would be tolerated. Others had to promise no sex workers would be allowed inside. In Nuremberg, inspectors patrolled the bathhouses. They checked water quality and who was in which tub. In London, a bishop banned mixed bathing altogether. It didn't last. People simply went at night. Still, the bathhouse kept its double life. You peek through a steamy window into the heating room. A man stirs a giant cauldron, pouring buckets into the wooden tubs. Nearby, a girl carves soap into flower shapes. Some bathhouses became coded meeting places. A man might wink at the bathmaid and pay extra for privacy. A wealthy merchant might rent the whole place for his lover. But danger also lurked here. The Black Death spread through close quarters. Scabies, fleas. One royal edict even banned public baths during plagues, fearing they spread disease. By the 1500s, the bathhouse's reputation had declined. In many towns, they were shut down. Not for hygiene, but for morals. You sit back, feeling the warm water against your legs. The laughter has quieted. Someone plays a lute near the fire. And for a moment, you understand why the bathhouse remained, half sanctuary, half scandal. A place where cleanliness met temptation, and steam blurred the lines between virtue and vice. You're kneeling on the cold stone floor of a small parish church in 14th century Flanders. Candles spit and sputter in the draught. You squint at the priest's heavy book of penances. He's reading aloud the list of days you're not supposed to have sex. You shift uncomfortably on your knees. It's longer than you thought. Advent. Absolutely forbidden. Lent. Of course. 40 days before Christmas. 46 before Easter. Fridays are off limits, being the day of Christ's death. Saturdays are questionable, too close to Sunday. And Sunday itself, God's day, obviously a sin. Then there are the eves of major feast days, saints' vigils, rogation days, ember days, the 12 days of Christmas, not a time for love. You count it out on your fingers. More than half the year, in theory, you're supposed to abstain entirely. The priest drones on about the sin of marital excess. Even within the approved days, you must do it properly, face to face, no strange contortions, no noisy enthusiasm, definitely no laughter. You look around at your neighbours. A couple in the back shift guiltily. The village miller seems to be asleep. The blacksmith is picking at his nails. They all know the rules, but whether they follow them, That's between them and their confessor. In confession, the priest will ask, how often, in what manner, on which days. Some confessors get very detailed, like spiritual customs inspectors. Manuals from the time even suggest lines to ask, did you finish before your husband? Did you provoke him to lust? Did you lie together on a feast day? Meanwhile, rumours swirl about the clergy themselves. A bishop caught with a mistress, a monk with a village girl. They too must confess, though perhaps less publicly. You close your eyes listening to the priest's solemn voice. He insists this is all to save your soul, that controlling the body proves devotion. You can almost believe it until you remember the snatches of song you heard last night in the alehouse. Dirty jokes, winking smiles. The real world never quite matches the page. As you rise, joints stiff, you wonder how many newlyweds actually waited, how many confess honestly, and how many simply say their prayers, promise to do better and slip back under the blanket as soon as the candles are out. You stand in the courtyard of a 14th century Italian city-state. The sun bakes the cobbles and you squint as you watch a small crowd gather around a wooden platform. On it stands a woman with her hair hacked short, her chemise torn open at the back so everyone can see the brand seared onto her shoulder, adulteress. In many medieval cities, adultery isn't just a sin, it's a crime. Punishments vary wildly by place and class. Fines if you're rich, beatings if you're poor, branding for repeat offenders. You hear that in Paris, unfaithful wives could have their heads shaved. In parts of Germany, the penalty was flogging while being paraded through town. In England, wives might be ducked in a pond on a cold day, public humiliation as a warning to others. But it's not always the woman who pays. You walk past another court record. A man is fined for keeping a mistress in defiance of local law. He argues he's unmarried. The magistrate points out he's been bedding a merchant's wife. That, he's told, is theft of another man's property rights. Property, that's what marriage often is here. Women as conduits for lineage, alliances, inheritance. Adultery threatens it all. You look at another law code. In Castile, the husband could kill his wife and her lover if he caught them in the act and face no punishment. In England, juries often sympathised with jealous husbands. In Florence, a man could have his nose cut off for cuckolding another, so everyone would see the mark of dishonour. But hypocrisy runs deep. You hear a merchant joking with his friends about visiting brothels, unashamed. The bishop keeps a mistress in a nearby villa. Even the king's bastards are openly acknowledged at court. It's women who pay the price. You shift uncomfortably as the crowd jeers. The branded woman stumbles off the platform. Somewhere a confessor waits to take her statement. She'll confess, she'll pray, but the mark on her skin will never fade. You leave the square slowly, the heat pressing down on you, and you wonder how many couples held hands in private, whispering love, knowing one wrong step could end in punishment for life. You sit on a creaking wooden bench in a quiet library, candles hissing in pools of melted wax. Before you is a battered manuscript, the De Secretis Mulierum, on the secrets of women. Written in the 13th century, often attributed to Albertus Magnus, though scholars debate that. You run your fingers over the cramped Latin script. It is not pornographic, it is clinical, or so it claims. You read passages about how women's bodies are cold and wet by nature, how this explains their supposed weakness, how female pleasure is dangerous, it might make her lustful, ungovernable. You turn the page. It describes the female orgasm as necessary for conception. Some medieval physicians truly believed a woman had to climax for pregnancy to occur. Others argued this was nonsense. Debates raged among men who had never asked their wives. Another page offers advice on avoiding conception. It warns that certain herbs, pennyroyal, rue, might end a pregnancy. But it's cautious. Knowledge of such things is risky. You lean closer. There's a list of positions, some acceptable, some condemned. Face to face, humane, from behind, bestial, standing, sinful, sideways, questionable. Elsewhere, you find references to Aristotle's Problemata, explaining that overly lustful women grow hair on their chins, proof of their masculine heat. You blink slowly, sleepily. The text claims a man's seed can be so hot it burns away impurities in the womb, ensuring a male child. Too cold, a girl. If both seeds are weak, a monster. It is all written with solemn authority, but you hear the dry crackle of absurdity beneath it. A scholar nearby sniffs. "Science," he murmurs, as though that excuses everything. In the shadows of this library, knowledge is power, but knowledge about sex is carefully managed, half truth and half fantasy. You close the book gently, the parchment warm from candlelight, and you wonder how many Iwids held these beliefs in their heads as they lay down together. Ignorance, after all, was not a failure. It was taught. You glide down a cold, echoing corridor in the Château de Blois. The year is 1515. Tapestries ripple in a draught. You slip past a yawning guard and enter the royal bedchamber. It is grand, no question. Velvet canopy, carved bedposts, silver candlesticks. But don't be fooled. Privacy is an illusion here. Royal beds are stages for politics. A marriage unconsummated can be annulled. The bedding must be witnessed, even if only formally. Servants gather at the door. Ministers murmur blessings. You watch as a new bride in heavy brocade sits stiffly on the bed. The groom removes his boots, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. A bishop mutters prayers that sound uncomfortably practical. It's no accident the bedding is so public. Dynasties depend on heirs. A queen who doesn't produce one is blamed, no matter the truth. Later, you follow whispers about kings with mistresses. Charles VII of France had Agnès Sorel paraded so openly people called her the first official royal mistress. She bore him children while the queen was sidelined. You peek behind the arras and see a noblewoman giggling with a page. Affairs are not uncommon at court, but discretion is everything. A scandal threatens alliances. Some monarchs are famously pious, others not at all. Louis IX bans brothels in Paris, but pays his soldiers' debts to them. Henry VIII will eventually marry 6 times, blaming his wives for failing to give him sons. You listen as 2 old courtiers debate whether it's a sin to enjoy your wedding night too much. One insists, yes, pleasure is corruption. The other shrugs. God wouldn't have made it feel good otherwise. Candles gutter. You feel the weight of all those expectations pressing on the heavy quilts. And you realize royal sex was less passion than duty, a transaction measured in heirs, dowries, treaties. You step back quietly, leaving the couple to their cold, careful embrace. Outside the chamber, history waits to see if they succeed. You kneel on the creaking boards of a confession box in 15th century Spain. The wood smells of mildew. The small screen between you and the priest is splintering. He whispers, "Tell me your sins." Your voice trembles as you confess you lay with your husband on a feast day, that you enjoyed it too much, that you may have tempted him into unnatural positions. He sighs heavily. You hear the scratch of his quill noting penance. Confession manuals from this time read like intimate interrogations. Priests are instructed to ask, did you lie with her during menstruation? Did you spill seed outside the vessel? Did you imagine another? You shiver. The questions probe deeper than you thought possible. He tells you that marital sex is allowed but not unbridled, that you must be open to children, that pleasure for its own sake is sin. You nod, biting your lip. Outside, the village continues as always, fields to plough, ale to brew, children to feed. Inside this box, human frailty is dissected with forensic detail. You hear stories of couples lying about the feast days, of men confessing they forced their wives, of women confessing they refused them, fearing another mouth to feed. The priest knows them all. He dispenses forgiveness, but the shame lingers. In the dark, he warns you not to lead your spouse into sin. You thank him softly and rise. Your knees crack. You feel no cleaner, only quieter. And you wonder, how many walked out determined to obey every rule? How many simply crossed themselves, whispered an apology to God, and went back to the same bed, the same sins? You close the door behind you, the wind tugs at your cloak, and you realize confession is not just about forgiveness, it is about control. You sit on a worn bench in a cramped ecclesiastical court in 14th century England. It smells of wet wool, sweat, and candle smoke. A clerk scrawls notes with a squeaky quill. These are the bawdy courts, the church's own legal system for regulating moral offences: adultery, fornication, bastardy, even gossip. You watch a nervous young woman stand before the archdeacon. She's accused of lying with a man out of wedlock. The clerk reads her name aloud, then his. Both faces redden. She admits it. The priest tuts and fines her a few shillings. She must do public penance, standing in the church porch barefoot, wearing only a shift, holding a candle. You look at the record book, hundreds of such cases. A married woman caught with a neighbour, a widow paid for favours, a priest's mistress named and fined. These courts don't hang or flog people, they shame them. That's the point. The community must see sin punished. You hear another case called a couple accused of premarital sex. They admit it, but they're betrothed, they insist. The court debates whether that makes it less sinful. A scholar nearby explains that pre-contract was a kind of informal marriage promise, technically binding but easily abused. Couples could sleep together claiming they were pledged, then deny it later if convenient. You rub your temples. The line between betrothal and sin is blurred. The court tries to enforce it. Next, you watch a midwife testify. She says she delivered a child conceived too early after a wedding, proof of fornication. The couple shifts uneasily. Outside the court, life goes on. Peasants gossip. Ale flows in the tavern. Songs with rude lyrics are sung by children. You realize these courts are less about stopping sex and more about managing it, keeping order, extracting fines. No one here pretends chastity is universal, they just want it to look like it is. As the last case is called, the clerk yawns, the priest stretches, another day judging the same sins. You leave quietly, the door creaking shut behind you. And you wonder, did anyone really fear these courts? Or was it just part of life, a confession, a fine, a muttered prayer, and then back to the same bed, the same temptations? You're standing in a smoky great hall in 12th century Aquitaine. Troubadours tune their lutes, warming their voices with honeyed wine. Candles drip onto oak tables. Tonight they'll sing of courtly love. You lean against a pillar, listening. The song is breathless. A knight adoring a married lady from afar. He pledges lifelong service. She rewards him with a glance, maybe a handkerchief. Never consummation, that would ruin the magic. You see ladies in silks smile behind fans. Young squires clutch their chests theatrically. But it's a game, a set of rules. You wander outside to the cold courtyard. There's less poetry here. A nobleman negotiates a marriage for his daughter. Dowries, land rights, alliances. No one asks if she loves the groom. Real marriage is hard currency. Inside the hall, the troubadour sings of unfulfilled desire. Outside, scribes draw up contracts. You remember the church's teaching. Marriage is for procreation and avoiding sin, not pleasure. Husbands owe wives their marital debt, sex on demand, within limits. Wives owe obedience. But love? That's not required. You see a lady wiping tears as she listens. Maybe she's imagining a life where someone adores her words, not her dowry. Later you follow her to her chamber. She fingers a carved box with letters from a courtly admirer. Nothing physical has happened, just words, longing, safely out of reach. And that is the point. Courtly love flourishes precisely because real marriage rarely allows romance. Still, not everyone keeps it chaste. Records abound of noble women and their lovers, of jewels over stolen kisses, of husbands quietly ignoring affairs to avoid scandal. You hear a whispered rumour of Eleanor of Aquitaine herself writing love songs, of her daughter Marie of Champagne sponsoring poets who praised adultery in carefully coded verse. But all must maintain the facade. You step away from the music, the firelight, the polite hypocrisy, and you understand. In this world, sex within marriage is duty. Sex outside it is danger, but also freedom, if you're lucky enough to escape punishment. You shiver in the night air. And you wonder, did any couple ever manage both, duty and desire? Or did they simply learn to keep them separate, one for the hearth, one for the heart? You walk along the muddy bank of the Thames, the water lapping black and cold. Across from the city walls of London lies Southwark, rowdy, half respectable, half lawless. You're here to see the so-called Winchester geese. These women work in licensed brothels, paying rent to the Bishop of Winchester himself. You duck under a swinging sign, a red glove, and enter the dim, smoky main room. Low benches, ale in battered mugs. Women in striped hoods mark themselves as sex workers by law. A bailiff collects fees. He wears a cross around his neck and carries a ledger. Church official, landlord, moral warden, all in one. You sit quietly in the corner, watching negotiations. A customer pays, and the woman leads him up rickety stairs. It's not glamorous. The sheets are rough. The straw mattress creaks. Candles gutter in the draught. But here it's at least semi-regulated. The bishop's men enforce rules. No theft, no underage girls. Women must be inspected for disease, though the physician is barely trained. Better than the streets, barely. Outside, moralists preach doom. Inside, the bailiff counts rent. You hear the term holy prostitutes whispered bitterly, because the bishop collects the profits while condemning them from the pulpit. Records show the hypocrisy openly. The church forbade prostitution in theory but profited from it in practice. Fines from adultery cases went to the bishop's coffers. Licensed brothels paid taxes. Southwark thrived on this uneasy compromise. You watch a girl no older than 16 sip watery ale between customers. She fingers a rosary, muttering prayers. No one here wants this life, but for many, it's survival. You stand slowly, brushing straw from your cloak. As you step outside, you hear the preacher again, shouting about hellfire. The bailiff closes the door on him, locking in the night's business. And you wonder if the bishop sleeps easy, knowing salvation is funded by sin. You stand in the chilly nave of a massive cathedral, breath frosting as you exhale. It is the late 12th century, and the stone vaults seem to swallow sound. A priest passes you in heavy robes. He's supposed to be celibate. The church has required it officially for generations, reaffirming it at Lateran councils and synods. Marriage is banned, so is concubinage. But you catch the whispers. You hear of Father Thomas, whose housekeeper has 3 children with his pale green eyes. No one talks about it openly, but everyone knows. In rural parishes, priests often kept unofficial wives. Concubinae, they were called in court records. You watch a bishop's court convene to fine such a priest. It's not about rooting out sin so much as collecting revenue. A priest caught with a concubine might pay a fine, say penance, and go back to her as soon as he could afford it. You peek at a register. The archdeacon's clerk has written dozens of such cases in a single year. Meanwhile, higher up the hierarchy, things aren't much cleaner. You drift through the papal palace at Avignon. Cardinals dine on gilded plates. Gossip swirls about bastards recognised. Mistresses maintained discreetly. Even reforming popes can't fully enforce the rules. The problem is too big, too human. You slip back into a quiet village church. A woman kneels before the priest, confessing that she tempted him. He gives her penance, his voice trembling. She's supposed to be the temptress, he the victim. You feel the cold press of hypocrisy against your skin. Not every priest broke the vow. Many lived in genuine celibacy. Many agonized over their failures, confessing with tears. But the rule itself set them apart, made them holy in theory, human in practice. You sit on a hard pew as the wind howls outside, and you wonder how many prayers were whispered in the dark, begging forgiveness for needs that no vow could truly erase. You leaf through a battered old book in a damp monastery library. The parchment crackles, ink faded to brown. It's a penitential, a manual for confessors listing sins and their appropriate penances. You squint at the tiny Latin letters. Did you lie with your spouse on a holy day? 2 weeks fasting. Did you perform unnatural acts? 3 years on bread and water. Did you spill seed outside the vessel? 50 lashes or equal arms. It reads like an accountant's ledger for the soul. You trace a line about marital duty. Husbands must not deny wives their debt. Wives must not refuse without cause, but they must do so in moderation, without lewd talk or excess joy. You close the book and imagine explaining this to a tired peasant couple sharing a single bed with their children at their feet. Another page warns against self-pleasure. Better to marry than to burn, Paul said, but the church adds, better to abstain altogether. You hear monks in the cloister chanting psalms. Many flagellate themselves for stray thoughts. In confessionals across Europe, priests ask pointed questions. Manuals instruct them how, in what manner, how often, with whom, on which days. For some, it becomes a lurid interrogation. For others, genuine guidance. You read that in Ireland, old penitentials recommend exile for certain sins. In Anglo-Saxon England, paying sheep or silver. Always a price, always a tally. You shiver in the cold library. Sin is universal. The church's response is to catalogue it, weigh it, assign punishment. You close the book and blow out the candle. Outside, you hear a couple laughing in the dark, ignoring the rules for one stolen night of warmth. And you wonder which is the greater sin, to love imperfectly or to never try at all. You find yourself in a damp stone hall, watching a bishop pore over a tangled family tree. He's trying to decide if these two nobles can marry. It's 13th century France. The church has strict rules about consanguinity, blood relations. You're forbidden to marry within 7 degrees of kinship. That's absurdly broad. Most of Europe is technically related if you trace it back far enough. The bishop sighs, doing the math. The couple are 4th cousins. That might be too close. But their families are powerful. A papal dispensation can be bought. You listen to the priest mutter, money greases the path to salvation. Elsewhere, peasants can't afford dispensations. If they're caught marrying a cousin, they risk annulment, but no one checks too carefully. You see another case where the marriage is dissolved after 20 years, children declared bastards, inheritance thrown into chaos. Royal dynasties are the worst offenders. You stand in the Spanish court watching the Habsburgs plan yet another cousin marriage to secure lands. Charles II of Spain will eventually be born with a jaw so deformed he can't chew properly. His family tree looks like a wreath, but the rules don't apply to everyone equally. In rural villages, local priests might turn a blind eye. In royal courts, they write elegant legal fictions. You see the bishop finally stamp the dispensation. The couple smile. The alliance is sealed. You turn away slowly, and you wonder how many loved ones were kept apart by these rules, or forced together by them. You step inside a Benedictine monastery at dusk. The air is damp with moss and incense. Monks move silently in the cloister, cowls drawn, eyes lowered. They've taken vows of chastity, poverty, obedience. You walk past their cells, tiny rooms with straw mattresses, cold stone floors, candles flicker. On a shelf lies the Rule of St. Benedict, warning against even touching one another unnecessarily. Yet temptation is everywhere. You listen to an old monk in confession. He admits to impure thoughts. The confessor sighs, offers penance. A novice nearby cries, he's been caught with another boy. The abbot debates whether to expel him or assign harsher discipline. Records show these weren't rare. Church councils repeatedly issued orders against unnatural vice in monasteries. Visitations found monks sharing beds, letters, secret liaisons. In women's convents too, rumours spread of nuns writing passionate poems to each other, or meeting priests at the grill, fingers brushing through iron bars. Not everyone sinned. Many resisted, prayed, fasted, flagellated themselves to kill desire. But they were human. You read a visitation record, an abbot reprimanded for keeping a mistress in a cottage on monastery land, a prior fined for paying for a woman's silence, another monk punished for keeping a love letter. You pause at a candle, watching the flame dance. Desire never truly leaves, even behind cloister walls. You hear chanting rise, solemn and beautiful, and you wonder how many voices trembled with secrets they dared not confess. You stand in the smoky main hall of a Norman manor, watching the guests feast on roast goose and trenchers of spiced pears. The musicians scrape out a lively tune, but everyone is waiting for the main event, the bedding. Tonight is the wedding night, not just private, but witnessed. You move closer as the steward clears a path through the rushes. The bride and groom look nervous. She's 17, he perhaps 19. A priest blesses them once more. Then the crowd begins their ancient, embarrassing duty. They escort the couple upstairs, laughing, singing bawdy verses. The bride clutches her veil tighter. A cousin pretends to swoon at the thought of what's to come. The steward carries a candle, so there's no dark corner to hide in. In the small chamber, the bed is piled with embroidered blankets. The couple is ceremonially undressed, often by family or close friends. Some places require the bride's shift to be lifted just enough to prove she's untouched. Elsewhere, they make sure the groom's in good health for the task. You feel a second-hand flush of embarrassment. Even the priest watches to ensure the union is properly begun, for alliances must be secure. Consummation validates the marriage in canon law. Without it, the union can be annulled. Some lords even demand evidence. Blood on sheets displayed the next morning. In noble courts, failure to consummate could mean scandal, inheritance disputes, even war. You step back as the guests file out, leaving the couple alone at last. Their faces are pale, solemn. In a world without privacy, sex isn't only desire, it's duty, proof, politics. You lean against the cold wall outside, hearing muffled whispers and creaking boards. Later, the hall will toast them as man and wife, certain that lineage will be secured. The steward will burn rushes scented with lavender to mask the sweat and embarrassment. You look at the veiled bride. When she returns, hair mussed, eyes downcast. She's married now in every sense, and you wonder how many couples learned love afterward, or never at all. You're standing in a cramped London shop, the smell of dye and wax filling your nose. Bolts of fine wool and imported silk are stacked behind the merchant. A young wife fingers a rich crimson fabric, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Sumptuary laws say she shouldn't buy this. Such colours are reserved for higher ranks, but wealth has its temptations. You watch the merchant whisper, offering a secret deal. Her husband is away on trade. She smiles, imagining herself in scarlet. Sumptuary laws were moral as much as economic. In 14th century England and France, they tried to stop the lower sorts from dressing like nobles. They feared blurred lines between classes, but also between virtue and vice. A woman in fine fabric might attract more than admiration. City records show brothel keepers fined for dressing prostitutes above their station. Bright colours, expensive trims, even certain furs marked a woman as dangerously alluring. You leaf through a 1363 English statute. It bans cloth of gold for merchants' wives, limits the length of trains, demands honesty in apparel. But seduction cares nothing for statutes. In Florence, officials chase tailors who sell forbidden velvet to wealthy artisans' wives. In Paris, moralists complain that even respectable women look like courtesans. You step onto a busy medieval street. Women pass by in linsey woolsey, in homespun, in smuggled silks. Some dress modestly, others push the limits. Young apprentices whistle, ignoring the laws completely. And behind closed doors, these garments become tools of seduction. A laced bodice undone, a sleeve falling artfully. a veil lifted only for one. You see a confessor scolding a woman for her vanity. He warns her bright colours provoke lust in others. He gives her a penance for pride. But you know the truth. Clothing was not just warmth or modesty. It was invitation, promise, armour, advertisement. You listen to the quiet rustle of fabric as the woman finally buys the forbidden cloth. She pays quickly, wraps it tight, and hurries home. Outside, the bell tolls compline. The street empties, shadows deepen, and you wonder what stories that red fabric will tell in candlelight. You sit on a three-legged stool in a smoky hut on the edge of a Breton village. Herbs hang in bunches from the rafters: rue, tansy, pennyroyal. The old woman before you grinds something in a mortar, muttering under her breath. She's the village healer, or witch, depending who you ask. Tonight she's preparing a restorative tea for a frightened girl. You see the girl clutching her belly, eyes wide with fear. She's unmarried, pregnant, desperate. Pennyroyal is known for its warming properties. Enough of it can bring on bleeding. Tansy has the same reputation. Ancient texts call them women's herbs. The church calls them dangerous, even murderous. You watch the old woman measure carefully. Too much can kill. Too little is useless. There's no guarantee it will work at all. This knowledge is handed down in whispers, written between the lines of medical manuscripts by monks who claim not to approve. In England, authorities try to prosecute those who sell poisons to end pregnancies, but evidence is hard to find. You remember a case in Paris where a midwife was accused of providing abortifacients. She denied it, but they burned her tools. In the German cities, broadsheets warn of women selling deadly teas. In the canon law, abortion after quickening is homicide. Before that, a sin, but murkier. Yet need always finds supply. You hear the girl sniffle as she drinks. The old woman pats her hand gently. "Say a prayer," she whispers. Outside, the village snores on, ignorant or choosing not to see. In universities, learned men debate ensoulment. When does life begin? Some say at conception, others at 40 days. Theologians split hairs while women weigh risks in candlelit rooms. You see the old woman dump the dregs into the fire. Sparks crackle, vanish. You stand slowly, brushing soot from your tunic. Outside, the air is cold and damp. The healer's hut looks like any other cottage, but you know what bargains were struck within, and you wonder how many lives were quietly changed by hands that knew exactly which leaf to pluck. You walk through a churchyard in late 14th century Lübeck. The plague has passed, but its memory clings like fog. Carved on the chapel wall is a grim mural, Der Totentanz, the dance of death. You study the skeletal figures leading the living in a macabre round. Kings, peasants, maidens, priests, all equal in decay. The painter's message is clear: death spares no one. But you notice something else. A young woman clutches her skirts as a leering skeleton pulls her close. A couple locked in embrace is dragged away. The artist has woven lust into the warning. Lust leads to sin, sin leads to death. You see priests pointing at the mural during sermons, reminding parishioners to shun carnal temptations. The plague was God's punishment for licentiousness, they claimed. Moralists wrote of taverns where men and women drank and dallied until God's wrath smote them. You imagine the fear, couples confessing frantically, swearing they'd been chaste, parents warning daughters not to flirt with stable boys, husbands accusing wives of infidelity as cities burned corpses outside the walls. Yet even in plague years, marriage contracts were signed, children were conceived, brothels reopened quickly after quarantines, priests married couples at mass gravesides. You walk along the mural. The skeletal bride smiles horribly. Her groom recoils. A message scrawled in Latin: "I am what you will be." You hear the parish priest explaining it to a group of children. He warns them not to yield to lust, that disease thrives in sinful bodies. But you know the truth is more complicated. Disease didn't care who was pious. The dance of death included the chaste and the debauched alike. You step back, the candlelight flickering across skulls and roses in the painting, and you realize the medieval mind saw sex as both life's joy and its danger, a promise of pleasure wrapped in the certainty of decay. You're standing at the edge of a bustling market square in Florence, 15th century. Baskets of oranges glow in the sun, cloth merchants haggle in harsh Tuscan, but your eyes are drawn to a group of women in striped yellow veils. You ask a vendor why. He shrugs. Prostitutes. Law says they wear those so decent women aren't mistaken for them. Sumptuary laws aren't just for noble silks. Cities legislate what sex workers must wear. In Venice, they're forced into yellow scarves. In Milan, a black cloak with a bright ribbon. In London, striped hoods. The idea? Public shame, easy identification, moral boundaries marked in fabric. You walk behind two of the women. One adjusts her veil bitterly. She has nice shoes, new, polished, a tiny defiance. Inside the brothel district, inspectors check that women obey dress codes. Fines are collected. Brothel owners pay taxes to the city, part of the urban budget. Records show the hypocrisy clearly. Magistrates who pass these laws also visit the women they shame. Confessors warn them to repent even as they count their fees for absolution. You see an argument at the edge of the square. A woman refuses to wear the veil, insisting she's reformed, that she's found honest work. The officer scolds her, threatens jail. She finally ties it on, trembling with fury. You listen to a preacher on the steps of a church, roaring about Sodom and divine punishment. The crowd nods along, but you see men eyeing the veiled women with interest. Later that night, you watch one of them slip away with a merchant. They both laugh at the hypocrisy, though hers is brittle. You stand in the shadows, the wind tugging your cloak, and you realize these laws weren't really about morality. They were about control, visibility, making sure everyone knew their place. Even sin must wear its uniform. You stand at the back of a small parish church in 14th century England. Sunlight filters through stained glass, motes of dust dancing in the cold air. A new mother kneels near the chancel steps, clutching a wax candle. It's her churching ceremony. You move closer, listening to the priest chant Latin prayers. He blesses her, sprinkling holy water. She bows her head, face pale with exhaustion. Her baby waits outside with her mother-in-law. The ritual is supposed to purify her after childbirth, because childbirth, though necessary, is seen as polluting. Blood, pain, the taint of Eve's curse. You feel a twinge of sympathy. She's survived the lying-in period, weeks in a smoky room, fed warm ale, warned not to walk lest her womb fall out. She's dodged puerperal fever, for now. And now she seeks permission to return to society, to attend mass again, to share a meal with neighbours without suspicion. Some say it's a thanksgiving for safe delivery. Others mutter it's just another way to shame women. You watch the priest hand her the candle, a reminder of the Virgin's purity, an impossible standard. She grips it tight, knuckles white. Elsewhere in Europe, variations abound. In France, they call it relevail. In Spain, purificación. Manuals instruct priests to keep it solemn, but not to frighten the woman. But gossip flows faster than holy water. If a woman refuses churching, neighbours whisper that she hides sin, that the child is illegitimate. You listen to the quiet words of blessing fade into silence. She rises slowly, body still battered from labour. She makes her way down the aisle, candle guttering in the draught. Outside, the village waits. Women nod in sympathy. Men glance away, embarrassed. And you realise sex might start in pleasure, but it ends here, in blood, fear, and solemn rites to make it clean again. You step into the cold yard, watching her walk home, candle, smoke curling in the wind. And you wonder how many felt relief at this blessing, and how many felt only shame. You walk through the dim corridors of a small Cistercian abbey, past a guest room where a married couple kneel at prayer. It's the 13th century and they're about to make a vow that shocks even some priests. Perpetual chastity. You listen to the abbot murmur approval. They've agreed never to lie together again, dedicating themselves to Christ. Such vows weren't common, but they weren't unheard of. Some married couples, especially in old age, swore off sex entirely, turning their home into a kind of private monastery. You watch them clasp hands. They speak softly, promising spiritual union instead of carnal. Outside, peasants gossip. Madness, they say. Marriage without heirs, without comfort. Yet these vows were praised by moralists. Manuals called them angelic. Church courts sometimes enforced them if both partners agreed, treating them as sacred contracts. But problems arose when only one partner wanted it. You flip through a canon law text. It warns a husband can't unilaterally deny the marital debt. Spouses owe each other access. You see a case in Aragon where a wife sued her husband for refusing to lie with her, insisting he'd broken their contract. The court agreed. He was ordered to perform his duty or grant an annulment. Elsewhere, stories tell of wives taking the veil, leaving husbands behind. Husbands entering orders, abandoning wives to poverty. Such choices left families and lawyers tangled for years. You imagine the pressure, wanting holiness, fearing damnation, but also fearing scandal. In confession, priests gave careful advice. Total celibacy was only for those who could bear it without falling into worse sin. Better to lie together modestly than to risk adultery or fornication. You hear the married couple finish their vows, rising stiffly. The abbot blesses them. Outside, the wind howls. They look at each other with solemn relief, perhaps love, perhaps fear. You step back into the cloister, and you wonder how many couples really kept such vows, and how many whispered apologies in the dark, quietly breaking them. You find yourself in a cramped city council chamber in 15th century Frankfurt. The aldermen squabble over a difficult problem. They're debating where to move the Frauenhaus, the city's official brothel. You watch them unfurl a stained map. Too close to the cathedral, the bishop protests. Too far outside the walls, the guard captain warns of crime. They aren't debating if there should be a brothel, only where. Medieval cities recognize sex work as inevitable. Better to control it, they said, than let it spread unchecked. You read a city ordinance aloud. It sets prices, requires health inspections, barely effective, and demands prostitutes register. The house pays a tax to the city coffers. In Cologne, the Frauenhaus was run by a municipal board. In Nuremberg, prostitutes wore regulated clothing. In London's Southwark, the bishop himself took rent from brothel keepers. You hear the aldermen argue about morality. One demands closing the place entirely. Another snorts, saying soldiers and merchants will simply visit unlicensed dens. They compromise. The brothel will move near the gate, but not on the main street. You slip outside as the decision is announced. The women of the Frauenhaus hear the news with weary acceptance. They'll pack their meagre belongings, new walls, same work. A few complain bitterly that the city profits from their bodies even as it shames them. You watch one tie her hair back, muttering a prayer in the fading light. Elsewhere, moralists will thunder from pulpits about Sodom, but they pay the taxes just the same. You turn away, the city bells tolling vespers, and you wonder how many truly believed regulation would stamp out sin, or if they simply preferred it taxed and tidy. You're wandering a bustling Flemish street in Bruges, 15th century. The air smells of fish, horse dung and warm bread, but your eye is caught by a young man strutting proudly in a dagger-tailed doublet. Sumptuary laws aren't just for women, they target men too. You sidle closer, his sleeves are slashed to show bright silk beneath. His hose is scandalously tight. A town crier posts the new decree. No man under knightly rank may wear cloth of gold. No servant may have fur trimming. Fines will be heavy. You hear laughter. Everyone knows these laws fail. The rich merchant's son will pay the fine, boasting of it as proof of success. But there's a moral panic behind it. Clothes are seen as dangerous, they blur class lines, they provoke lust. A moralist preacher shouts from the steps of a guild hall. He condemns these new fashions as unchristian. He says tight hose reveal the male form too clearly, inflaming sinful thoughts in women. You see city records where men are fined for flamboyant shoes with long pointed toes, poulaines so big they need whalebone stiffeners. A bishop's decree in France declares short doublets indecent, showing too much leg and buttock. In Florence, the sumptuary police patrol taverns, measuring sleeve widths. You lean in as the young man boasts to friends. They laugh about how the ladies watched them last night at the tavern. The authorities warn that such vanity leads to fornication, adultery, ruin. Yet the tailors keep sewing, the cloth merchants keep selling, and behind closed doors, the clothes come off anyway. You listen to the crier reading the law again. No one seems very chastened. You step away, the bells chiming compline, and you wonder if anyone truly believed that modest clothes would mean modest hearts. You're inside a timber-framed English cottage. The fire burns low, casting red light on a tired couple. It's the 14th century, and they're discussing a serious matter. Marital debt. It isn't money, but obligation. Canon law says each owes the other sexual access. You listen as the husband mutters he's too tired from the fields. The wife reminds him of the priest's warning. If he refuses too often, she can sue him in church court. Records show it happened. Women brought complaints that husbands denied them their rights. Courts sided with them. But it went both ways. Husbands sued wives who refused. You hear them talk quietly. She fears another mouth to feed. He fears angering God by denying her. Canonists debated this fiercely. Marital debt was meant to prevent adultery. Denying it was sin. But sex had to be moderate, open to children, never on feast days. You see a manual instructing confessors to ask, do you render the debt cheerfully? Do you force yourself on her? Some priests advise couples to live chastely if both agreed, but they warned that denying one's spouse could tempt them to sin elsewhere. You lean back against the cold wall. Outside, the wind howls against wattle and daub. The couple hold hands, finally agreeing to share the bed, not out of passion but duty. And you realise medieval marriage wasn't just love, it was contract, obligation, the parish priest watching over it all. You close your eyes, hearing the crackle of the fire, and you wonder how many found comfort in that duty, and how many felt trapped. You step into a small, smoky chamber in a 15th century German town. A woman screams on the straw-strewn floor. The midwife crouches at her side, sleeves rolled, hair bound tight. Midwives were indispensable, yet deeply suspect. You watch her tie a cord around the labouring woman's thigh. She mutters a prayer half in Latin, half in dialect. Her fingers are stained with herbs. She knows things male doctors don't, or won't. She recognises the slippery turning of the baby in the womb. She can ease pain with pennyroyal oil. She also knows how to hide a shameful birth. City councils license midwives, demand oaths of honesty, but they also interrogate them harshly, accuse them of witchcraft if the mother dies, charge them with abortion if the timing of birth seems suspicious. You see one record, a midwife fined for helping a servant girl hide a nobleman's bastard, another banished for bragging she could end unwanted pregnancies. The church both needs and fears her. Priests rely on midwives to baptize dying infants. Confessors warn them not to offer abortifacients. You watch as the baby finally slides free. The midwife wraps it, murmuring thanks to God. She wipes blood from her hands on her apron. Outside, women wait for news. Men hover, uncomfortable. The mother gasps relief, face slack with exhaustion. The midwife rests a hand on her head, whispering blessings older than any priest's Latin. You step back, the room smelling of blood, sweat, soot, hope. and you realize she holds life and death in those stained fingers, respected, feared, necessary. You close the door quietly behind you, and you wonder how many whispered secrets she carried to her grave. You're leaning against a crooked timber post in a bustling 14th century Paris street. Market stalls spill cabbages and eels onto muddy cobbles, but your eyes catch a confrontation brewing by the cloth merchant's awning. A wealthy burgher's wife is buying expensive imported damask. Her husband storms up red-faced, accusing her of wanting to impress some young clerk. You listen as he yells about waste and impropriety. But beneath it, the accusation is clear: adultery. Sumptuary laws gave moral weight to suspicion. If a woman dressed above her station, she invited lust and suspicion of infidelity. You remember a city statute: merchants' wives forbidden silk beyond a certain value. Another town's records mention fines for wives whose sleeves were too wide, their hoods too richly lined. A preacher thunders from the cathedral steps that fine clothes tempt the devil himself. Women who flaunt themselves must be hiding lust. You see the husband threaten to drag his wife before the ecclesiastical court. She shouts back about his own tavern dalliances. You smirk at the hypocrisy. Inside those church courts, you'd hear the sordid details. A neighbour testifying about late-night visitors. A servant whispering about gifts of jewellery. Fines were common. Public penance even more so. Barefoot processions with a candle. Forced apologies in church. Sometimes a husband used accusation to control his wife. Sometimes it was revenge. Sometimes it was all too true. You edge closer to hear the merchant's wife hiss that she'll burn the damask before she pleads guilty. He calls her a harlot. Passers-by gawk. A child tugs his mother's sleeve, asking what adultery means. She hushes him quickly. You hear the church bell toll for none. Life moves on. The fight dies down as quickly as it flared. She storms away, skirts wet with street filth. You wonder how many women risked beatings or lawsuits are for a bit of pretty cloth. How many men covered their own sins by crying adulteress, and how many, after the shouting, still ended up in the same cold bed. You sit in a dim scriptorium, candlelight casting long shadows over piles of parchment. A monk scowls as he copies a medical text in crabbed Latin. But you spot something hidden under his desk, a slim, tattered booklet. It's no psalter or moral treatise. It's an old Arabic medical manual, translated in Salerno, filled with shocking detail. You pick it up carefully. It describes aphrodisiacs, spices to stir desire, odd positions to cure infertility, strange amulets, even ways to judge a woman's heat. Salerno's medical school was famous for collecting Arabic, Greek, and Latin texts. Some were straightforward medicine, others skirted the line between science and erotica. You see marginal notes from earlier readers: too carnal, do not share. But share it they did. You flip pages describing the female body in detail that would scandalize the parish priest. Then you find a section on impotence cures, wildly optimistic recipes involving honey, pepper, and rooster testicles. You grin at the earnestness. In France and Italy, these books traveled among learned men. Some condemned them as immoral. Others insisted they were essential for doctors and midwives. You imagine a cleric hiding such a book behind his breviary, a physician whispering instructions to a wealthy client. Not all were in Latin. In Italy, you might find vernacular books of secrets sold in markets, promising love potions or sexual prowess. Authorities tried to ban them. The church declared them suspect, but demand never vanished. You close the manuscript softly. Outside, you hear monks chanting Compline. Desire finds its way even into libraries, even into careful script, and you wonder how many readers blushed, and how many put theory into practice. You're in the echoing hall of a bishop's court in 13th century England. The air is damp, the wooden benches hard. A clerk reads accusations in Latin, voice dry and steady. Incest. You watch the defendant, a weary-looking farmer, stand silent. His accuser, his wife's cousin. She claims he knew they were too closely related when they married. Canon law forbids marriage within 7 degrees of kinship, but in these tiny villages, everyone is related somehow. You see the priest scratching calculations on parchment. Lines connect names like a spider's web. Is second cousin too close? Third. You lean forward. The farmer swears he didn't know. The bishop frowns. Such cases clogged medieval courts. Nobles used accusations to sabotage alliances. Peasants found themselves in trouble when old family feuds resurfaced. You remember a case from France, a marriage dissolved after 20 years, children declared bastards, land returned to the church. Papal dispensations existed, but they cost money. Poor folk rarely had access. You listen as the priest lectures the farmer about avoiding scandal. In truth, incest wasn't always carnal sin. Often, it was bureaucratic sin, failing to navigate church rules. But real incest existed too. Cases emerge in grim confession records. Fathers abusing daughters, brothers raping sisters. Those brought harsh penances, exile, flogging, lifelong pilgrimage. You shiver at the contrast. A farmer fined for marrying a cousin he barely knew. A monster walking free if no one dared testify. The clerk calls the next case. Another cousin marriage. You slip out into the cold churchyard, mist curling around ancient tombs, and you wonder if anyone ever truly understood those tangled family trees, or if they simply married, prayed for forgiveness, and hoped no one noticed. You're in a cramped cottage in 14th century Tuscany. The air is thick with garlic, wine, and tension. A couple argues in hushed tones while their children sleep on straw pallets nearby. She's tired. Another mouth to feed will break them. He mutters about the priest's warnings. You listen as they debate a sin older than confession itself, withdrawal. Canon law calls it a grave offence. Thomas Aquinas lumps it with sodomy, acts against nature. Confessors ask pointedly, do you spill seed outside the vessel? Yet they all know people do it. You remember reading a Florentine manual advising priests how to question newlyweds about such acts. Another from Paris threatens penance on bread and water for a year. But enforcing it? Impossible. You watch the wife weep quietly. She mentions a neighbour who knows an herb that might dry the womb. He curses that it's witchcraft. Medieval texts are filled with contradictory advice. A 12th century medical treatise praises rue and pennyroyal as cleaners of the womb. Another condemns them as poisons. You see physicians debating in Salerno, the church condemning the practice while quietly copying the recipes in Latin glosses. You listen to the couple fall silent, holding each other despite fear. Outside, dogs bark, the village snores. You think about how the church wanted sex open to children, framed in duty and sacrament. But hunger, shame, fear made them seek any way to avoid that blessing. You close your eyes, the fire dying to embers, and you wonder how many whispered confessions were about this single, desperate act. You slip behind a carved wooden screen in a village church, straw crackling underfoot. The priest sits on the other side, his voice low, worn from decades of hearing secrets. This is the confessional. He asks in careful Latin-tinged French if you have sinned. You confess quietly. He leans forward. Did you lie with your spouse out of duty only, or with lust? He asks about adultery, fornication, self-pollution, coitus interruptus. Did you speak lewdly? Did you incite your spouse to unnatural acts? The manuals tell him to be thorough. Confession is surgery of the soul, no detail too small. You feel your face burn. Elsewhere in Europe, confessors probe with even more zeal. In Spain, guides instruct priests to ask married couples if they performed the marital act in ways that precluded conception. In England, they warn about pollution during sleep. You imagine priests untrained in medicine fumbling through these questions. Some approach gently, offering counsel. Others revel in the sordid details. You remember reading about a priest fined for propositioning penitence. Confession is supposed to be sacred, but people are people. You listen as the priest offers penance, bread and water, pilgrimage, coins for the poor. He raises a hand in blessing, absolution, bought with humiliation. You step outside. The church is dark and cold. Candles gutter in the wind. Outside, life goes on. Couples slip into barns together. Lovers whisper by the river. And you wonder how many truly felt cleansed, and how many simply learn to lie more carefully. You stand in a gloomy chamber of the French royal court, watching a strange scene unfold. Two lawyers argue in hushed, urgent voices, while the judge peers over his spectacles. It's not theft or murder on trial, it's impotence. You watch the defendant, a red-faced man in his 30s, glower at the floor. His wife weeps dramatically, claiming he cannot perform his marital duty. She wants an annulment. French canon law allows this suit. Impotence, impotentia coeundi, is grounds for dissolving a marriage, but proof is needed. You shiver in the damp room. They will require a trial by Congress. You listen as clerks recite precedents. Judges sometimes ordered the husband to attempt sex with his wife before court-appointed matrons and doctors. Witnesses to watch for failure. Imagine the humiliation. Some jurisdictions used examination instead. Doctors prodded and measured, noting any defect. They'd test for erection by handling the man. In Florence, physicians delivered written certificates, fit or incapable. You move closer, hearing the wife insist he's never been able. He denies it hotly, accusing her of preferring another man. Scandal runs through the onlookers. Elsewhere in Europe, similar humiliations play out. In Spain, church judges might accept testimony from servants about bedchamber noises, or lack thereof. In England, witnesses describe stains on sheets or motion of the bed. You smirk at the absurdity, but for them it was deadly serious. Without consummation, there's no valid marriage, no inheritance, no alliance. You see the judge finally rule. An expert exam must be conducted. The husband pales but cannot refuse. He's led away, feet scuffing the rushes. The wife follows, head high. You step outside as the wind whistles through narrow streets. Imagine the fear, the shame, and you wonder how many men prayed for sudden vigour, or simply bribed the doctors. You sit on a worn bench in a physician's study in Bologna, parchment crackling as you turn the pages of an old treatise. The room smells of ink, lamp oil, and dried rosemary. The text claims women are naturally more lustful than men. You frown. Yet it was a common belief. You read Aristotle and Galen interpreted through medieval glosses. Women are colder, wetter, but their wombs crave heat. Desire is a natural, dangerous imbalance. You find marginal notes scolding women for seduction. If a woman is not satisfied, her womb wanders. Hysteria, they say, can be cured by marriage, by regular intercourse. You lean back, imagining a priest explaining this to a couple in confession. Women, they warned, could not be trusted to control themselves. They'd seduce men to satisfy their itch. You see penitential manuals advising wives to obey their husband's sexual requests, but not to be too eager. Lust within marriage was still sin if it sought pleasure alone. You leaf through a case study, a wife accused of excessive demands. The court forced her to swear to moderate herself. Yet the same texts advise husbands to satisfy wives to avoid adultery, hypocrisy tangled with duty. You step into a Florentine piazza, watching women gossip by the fountain. They share recipes for love potions, discuss which husbands are lazy. A midwife chuckles, whispering that a little pennyroyal tea will cool the womb if need be. You see a priest scold a woman for being too forward with her husband. Another scolds a man for neglecting his wife's needs. Desire wasn't simple. It was feared, regulated, mocked, but ever present. You close the treatise carefully. The flame gutters in the cold air. And you wonder if any really believed they could control it, or if they simply enjoyed pretending. You stand in a cramped urban chamber in Paris, watching a new mother sign a parchment with a trembling hand. Her baby cries softly in a wicker cradle. She cannot nurse, or will not. A stout woman beside her waits with folded arms. The wet nurse. You watch as coins change hands. The nurse lifts the baby expertly, settling it at her breast. The infant quiets instantly. Wet nurses were everywhere in medieval cities. Nobles, merchants, even some artisans hired them. Nursing was seen as servile, time-consuming. It was said to sap beauty, distract from household management. Medical authorities claimed it also dampened desire. A wife who nursed might lose interest in her husband. You hear a physician warn that a lustful wet nurse might transmit her temperament to the child through milk. Moralists advised choosing a pious, chaste woman, though records show brothel workers sometimes moonlighted as wet nurses. You see a notary recording conditions, payment, length of service, penalties if the nurse's milk runs dry. Elsewhere in Europe, cities regulated wet nursing strictly. In Florence, guilds set fees and inspected wet nurses' health. In England, aristocratic families sent babies to country nurses for years. But dangers loomed. Infants died far from their mothers. Wet nurses might neglect or even kill difficult charges. Accusations of infanticide haunted them. You watch the mother's face tighten as she hands her baby over. Relief, grief, guilt in one look. The nurse hums softly, already forming a bond. Outside, a bell tolls vespers. Shadows lengthen, and you wonder how many mothers wept behind closed doors, or how many felt only relief at being free. You sit at a rough oak table in a merchant's house in Bruges. Candles sputter in the draught. Two families face one another, parchment spread between them. The marriage contract is being negotiated. You listen as fathers haggle over dowry amounts, property rights, guarantees of good behaviour. The bride sits silent in the corner, face downcast. Dowries were essential. They were insurance, status, a means to attract husbands of the right standing. You see the merchant boast that his daughter brings silk bolts, coin, even a small vineyard. The groom's father counters with promises of apprenticeships and trade connections. Scribes record every word. Disputes decades later will hinge on these clauses. You remember reading about dowry chests shipped across the Alps, guarded like treasure. But failure to pay could doom a marriage. Women were sometimes sent back to their families if installments fell short. Lawsuits filled city courts, unpaid dowries, lost inheritances, broken promises. Dowries weren't just for nobles. Even peasants negotiated modest sums, goats, land, a good cloak. You watch the bride finally stand, voice shaking as she agrees. Her future is being sold politely, yet there is power here too. Dowries gave women some claim if widowed. In Florence, a widow might recover her dowry and live independently. In Venice, dowry wealth shaped entire patrician fortunes. You see the final signatures made, hands shaken, wine poured. Outside, the street bustles with noisy carts, and you wonder how many saw this as security and how many saw it as a cage. You stand in a meadow outside York. It's the 13th century. Villagers gather in a loose circle, the sun setting in smoky gold. Two young lovers clasp hands before the priest. Hand fasting. You watch as they promise themselves to one another. The priest nods, murmuring Latin blessings. A ribbon binds their wrists. Unlike formal church weddings, hand fasting is simple, flexible. It can be as binding as any ceremony. In some places, it's recognized as a valid marriage. In others, it's an informal betrothal. You listen to the lovers whisper private vows, audible only to each other. Custom varies. In Scotland, hand fasting can last a year and a day before renewal or dissolution. In England, it often marks the start of formal wedding preparations. Canon lawyers hate its looseness. They demand bans, witnesses, fixed forms, but hand fasting persists, stubbornly local. You see old women nod approvingly. It's how they married. Records show courts struggling to prove if hand-fasted couples were really wed. Witnesses are called to repeat exact words spoken. Some deny, claiming it was only courtship. You hear gossip that some use it to bed a lover, then deny the vow. Others claim it protects them from sin. The priest finishes his prayer. The couple kiss shyly. Neighbors cheer. Someone strikes up a tune on a pipe. You feel the chill deepen as night falls. And you wonder how many couples felt bound for life, and how many untied the ribbon as quietly as they tied it. You find yourself standing in a smoky, dim-lit chamber in 14th century Castile. Tapestries hang stiff with age. Nobles shuffle uncomfortably, whispering behind fans and sleeves. Tonight is not for feasting, it's for proof. A newly married couple sits on the edge of their bed, looking pale. The priest finishes a Latin blessing, sprinkles holy water on the sheets, and steps back with grave solemnity. This is the bed test. You watch as family members remain in the room, at least for part of it. The newlyweds are expected to share a bed under observation, proving their union is honest and complete. Outside, servants and kinsmen hover, listening for muffled giggles or the creak of a bed frame. They want evidence. For high-status marriages, this proof of consummation carries weight. It validates alliances, ensures inheritance lines. Without it, the marriage can be annulled. You hear someone mutter about a previous annulment, a bride who refused her husband, claiming impotence. No one wants that scandal again. In France, there are records of stained sheets paraded for witnesses. In England, neighbours might gossip about hearing the joyful noises. You watch the newlyweds shift under the covers. Red-faced, they comply with duty more than desire. The priest eventually calls it done. He'll record that he witnessed them together. That suffices. You see them huddled in the dark afterward, whispering, maybe relief, maybe dread at this forced intimacy. Elsewhere in Europe, some couples bribed servants to report success. Some simply fled the room in mortification, but the records needed a tick, consummated, valid. Outside, the castle quiets. A dog barks in the yard, and you wonder how many nights of fear and embarrassment were recorded as triumph, and how many forged a strange bond in that forced closeness. You're walking a dusty road towards Santiago de Compostela. The wind smells of earth and sweat. Around you, dozens of pilgrims shuffle on blistered feet, staff in hand. But not all are here for spiritual enlightenment alone. You fall in beside a burly man from Gascony who confesses softly that he's here to cure his lust. His wife sent him, fed up with his wandering hands. Medieval society saw pilgrimage not just as devotion, but penance. Chronic fornicators were sent walking for months to cleanse themselves. You pass a woman mumbling a rosary. She's atoning for adultery. The priest told her to walk barefoot to the shrine. Some walked to Rome, others to local saints with reputations for cooling the passions. St. Thomas Becket's shrine in Canterbury saw lines of red-faced merchants begging forgiveness for brothel visits. You watch a confessor take coins in exchange for reducing the distance. Not everyone had the stamina for 500 miles. Yet some took it seriously. Records show men who returned home subdued, humbled by hunger and hardship. But others met temptation along the way. Inns along pilgrimage routes were infamous for offering more than a bed and meal. Prostitutes waited for weary, guilty men. You hear the Gascon admit he hopes he'll be too tired to sin after the journey. He laughs grimly. In church records, you've read priests praising pilgrimage as spiritual medicine, the long walk as discipline for the flesh. You trudge on, feet sore, sun hot on your neck, and you wonder how many returned home absolved, and how many sinned before they even reached the shrine. You stand in a cramped city council chamber in Florence, listening as magistrates argue over new sumptuary laws. But these aren't aimed at wealthy merchants or vain knights. They target prostitutes. You watch as a scribe notes that meretrices must wear a yellow veil or striped mantle so they're instantly recognizable. Elsewhere in Europe, rules vary. In London, prostitutes in Southwark must wear striped hoods. In parts of France, red belts. In Spain, large, garish cloaks. You hear the council claim it's for public morality. No honest woman will be mistaken for a whore. But you see the real motives in the ledger. Fines for breaking dress codes are a tidy revenue stream. You imagine a prostitute scraping to pay rent, then fined for forgetting her veil. City fathers want them visible but controlled. Sex work is tolerated, even taxed but shamed. You remember reading ordinances describing inspections of brothels, doctors checking for disease, clerks recording names. Yet demand never stops. Foreign merchants, soldiers, apprentices pour into cities eager for their services. You step outside into the stinking street. A young woman with a yellow veil trudges past, eyes down. She's marked, avoided by some, sought by others. A priest preaches nearby about Sodom. A city guard ignores him, collecting the brothel tax. You watch the hypocrisy thicken the air like smoke, and you wonder if anyone truly believed these veils stopped sin or simply made it easier to find. You slip into a small, dimly lit apothecary in 14th century Avignon. Shelves creak under jars of dried herbs, rue, pennyroyal, savin. You listen as a woman whispers to the apothecary. Her voice trembles. She's late, too late. He glances around nervously, then measures out a packet. He calls it cleanser of the womb. Abortion is illegal. The church condemns it as homicide if the fetus is formed. But when does life begin? Medieval theologians argue. Some say at quickening, when the mother feels movement. Others say at conception. You remember Thomas Aquinas declaring the rational soul enters later, so early abortion might be less a sin, but still grave. Secular courts vary wildly. In some places, they barely prosecute. In others, they execute women for infanticide, calling it abortion after birth. You watch the apothecary mutter that the mix doesn't always work. It might harm her. She weeps quietly. She cannot afford another mouth. Her husband beats her. Records show midwives fined, exiled, sometimes executed for offering such remedies. Yet demand never vanishes. You see a Paris court record where a woman insists she took herbs only to regulate her menses. The judge doesn't believe her. You hear rumours of brothel madams handing out pennyroyal teas like candy. And you notice even priests sometimes look the other way when a wealthy patron's daughter needs help. The apothecary wraps the bundle carefully, glancing at the door. Outside, the bells toll compline, and you wonder how many carried this secret to their grave. You sit on a plain wooden bench in a chilly cathedral chapter house. Monks debate in low Latin, their breath misting in the cold. They're discussing a scandalous topic, pleasure in marriage. One monk insists that sex is only for procreation. Anything else is sin. Lust, even with one's spouse, stains the soul. Another argues the older fathers allowed for marital debt, recognizing human weakness. You lean closer. They quote Augustine, "It's better to marry than burn. Sex as medicine for lust. A concession, not a blessing." But there's a darker strain here. Manuals warn husbands not to indulge wives' unnatural appetites. Confessors ask women if they demanded too much, if they enjoyed it too openly. You recall a penitential advising priests to give harsher penance for joyful sex acts, even within marriage. Yet contradictions abound. Church courts enforce the duty to render the marital debt. A spouse who refuses too often can be sued. In confession, priests advise moderation, not too often, not on feast days, not on Sundays. Avoid positions seen as unnatural. You hear a monk mutter that laughter in bed is scandalous. Another scoffs, saying human weakness makes saints of no one. You step outside into the cloister. The cold bites your face. You see married couples huddled against the wind sharing cloaks. You wonder if they lie to the priest, then cling to each other at night. And you think about how the church tried to regulate desire, and how stubbornly it burned anyway. You're standing in the cool shadow of a medieval city gate as the sun sets over rooftops. Smoke curls from chimneys, bells toll vespers, and you follow a group of men along a cobbled lane to a large timber building. Above the door swings a carved sign, Stew House. You slip inside and the air changes instantly. It's thick with candle smoke, cheap perfume, and laughter. A madam in a low-cut gown greets newcomers. She keeps a ledger under her arm. Business is brisk tonight. This is no illegal dive. It's a city-licensed brothel. You lean against a post, listening to a clerk collect taxes at the door. Cities realized long ago that banning prostitution was impossible, so they regulated it, taxed it, profited from it. In London's Bankside, the Bishop of Winchester himself licensed dozens of stews, lending his name to the term Winchester geese. In Paris, the city government issued ordinances listing which streets could house brothels. You watch the madam pay her monthly fee, ensuring protection from harassment, so long as she follows the rules. Rules about signage, about health checks, about the colour of clothing her workers must wear. But you notice the workers themselves, young, old, pretty, plain, some laughing with customers, others hollow-eyed. You see a girl who can't be more than 15. She meets your gaze briefly, then looks away. You think about ordinances forbidding them to solicit in churches, about fines if they leave their district, about beatings for refusing a customer. In the corner, a city guard drinks wine for free. Enforcement is flexible when coin changes hands. You step back into the street. The door closes behind you, laughter muffled. You hear sermons nearby condemning harlots and their customers to hell. But the city coffers keep ringing, and you wonder how many called it vice, while depending on it to balance the books. You find yourself in the private chamber of a wealthy family in Milan. Candles flicker in gilded sconces, throwing shadows over a canopy bed. Tonight is tense. A marriage was celebrated 2 days ago, but the bride's father is demanding proof of her chastity. You watch as an old midwife is summoned. She carries a bundle of clean linens and a solemn expression. The young bride sits silent, eyes red from crying. Her new husband shifts uncomfortably. Virginity was currency, a guarantee of legitimacy. Without it, the dowry might be contested, the marriage annulled. You see the midwife pull the girl aside, examining her roughly. She pronounces the hymen intact or damaged. Her word carries weight, but it's no science. Elsewhere, proof is cruder. In parts of France and Spain, the bridal sheets must bear bloodstains after consummation. If they do, they're displayed to the family with pride. But what if there's no blood? You remember court records filled with bitter arguments over faked stains, animal blood, red wine, desperate families bribing servants. In Germany, you recall an ordinance fining women who passed themselves off as virgins when they were not. You see the midwife finish, voice low, verdict delivered. The father's face relaxes, coin exchanges hands. The bride wipes her eyes, avoiding everyone's gaze. You hear a servant gossip that her husband won't touch her now that her father doubted. You step outside into the courtyard. Crickets chirp in the dark. You wonder how many newlyweds trembled at these humiliating tests, and how many lost everything over a broken membrane. You're standing in the chill nave of a Romanesque church, watching a priest thunder from the pulpit. His voice echoes off stone walls. He lists the forbidden days: Advent, Lent, Rogation days, Ember days, Sundays, feast days of the Virgin, vigils of apostles. You do the math, that's half the calendar. Sex on these days, mortal sin. You lean back against a column, listening to parishioners shift uncomfortably. Married couples exchange looks. Penitential manuals are explicit. Sex on a forbidden day must be confessed. Penance assigned. You hear the priest insist that even marital duty must bow to the church's calendar. He quotes Augustine on chastity and self-control. But outside these walls, you know what happens. Couples ignore the bans or forget them. Confessors are flooded with admissions. Priests warn them sternly, then assign bread and water fasts or extra prayers. You remember reading a French bishop's letter begging Rome to relax the rules. People will not obey, he complains. You watch a merchant argue with his wife outside the church door. He insists he'll lose trade travelling for confession. She insists she doesn't want to risk hell. In confessionals, priests develop a quiet pragmatism. Some wink and wave them off. Others demand strict penance. You step into the cold night. Bells toll compline. You wonder how many lay awake in silence, obeying the rule, and how many risked sin for a moment of warmth in the dark. You're in a cramped apothecary in 13th century Salerno, breathing in the sharp scent of crushed herbs. Shelves sag under jars labelled in Latin. A physician lectures a young apprentice. You listen carefully. He insists that sex is healthy, within reason. Medieval medicine saw sex as a form of balancing humours. A man who retained seed too long risked fever, melancholy, even madness. A woman, they said, needed seed to mix with hers to conceive and remain healthy. You see the physician hand over a parchment listing sexual prescriptions. How often, which positions preserved health, which were dangerous. He warns that too much sex will weaken the body, drain vital spirits. Young men are especially at risk of drying the brain. He says too little will make them sick. You smile at the earnestness. Elsewhere, medical texts debate aphrodisiacs, ginger, pepper, galingale. Remedies for impotence include rooster testicles and expensive spices. You watch the apprentice scrawl notes. In the corner, a patient waits nervously, hoping for a cure for coldness in the loins. You see women ask discreetly about herbs to end pregnancies, about drinks to increase desire. The physician answers in riddles, always mindful of church censure. You step outside into the narrow street. The sun sets behind tiled roofs. You wonder how many actually believed these recipes and how many simply hoped for a miracle. You're standing in the cramped, smoky hall of a manorial court in England. Peasants crowd the doorway. The steward sits on a high-backed chair, tapping a staff for silence. Two people stand accused, a miller's wife and a young shepherd. The husband points angrily, face red. He demands justice. Adultery is a moral sin, but also an offence against property, inheritance, honour. You hear the steward read the charge aloud. Witnesses saw them in the fields at dusk. She insists he forced her. He denies it. Punishments vary wildly. Some pay fines into the Lord's coffers. Others do public penance, barefoot with a candle, confessing before the whole village. In France, some towns force adulterers to ride backwards on donkeys. In Italy, they might be whipped through the streets. You recall reading of a German city where a man was forced to stand in a cage in the square, jeered at by children. Yet punishment isn't certain. Wealth and influence can make charges disappear. Husbands might settle for a payment. Church courts prefer penance over physical punishment. You see the miller's wife sob as sentence is given, pay a fine, a week's penance in the church porch. The husband glares but pockets the coin. Outside, the village goes quiet as dusk falls. You think about how many accusations were real and how many were revenge, greed or jealousy, and you wonder how many return to the same cold hearth afterward, pretending forgiveness was possible. You slip into a chill stone cloister just before dawn. Candles flicker, guttering in the wind. A monk hurries past you, face hidden in his cowl, but you hear a muffled laugh behind the column. You round the corner and see them, a young priest and a woman tangled in whispers. She smooths her hair quickly as you appear. He wipes her kiss from his mouth. Clerical celibacy was a rule, not always a reality. You lean against the wall and listen as they part, eyes bright with guilt and excitement. Back in the chapter house, abbots thunder about chastity. Canon law is clear. Priests must renounce sex, marriage, even suspicion of concubinage. But the records tell a different story. You remember court rolls listing fines for keeping a concubine in the rectory, parish priests ordered to do public penance. In England, bishops issued orders forbidding priests to house women under colour of service. Yet they often did, maids, nieces, housekeepers who bore suspiciously priestly children. You think of that letter from a French bishop lamenting priests with sons who call them uncle. Some clerics bought dispensations quietly. Others bribed local officials. Some didn't bother hiding at all. You hear a monk at the next pillar mutter that enforcing celibacy is like carrying water in a sieve. And you remember too the hypocrisy, these same priests enforcing penance for fornication among peasants. You step out into the dark courtyard. The wind cuts through your robe. You wonder how many whispered, "Forgive me, Father," in confession, and how many heard it in their own beds. You stand in a damp city hall in 15th century Florence. Torches smoke against vaulted ceilings. A notary sharpens his quill, ready to record every shameful detail. A man kneels in chains on the cold floor, accused of sodomy. You watch as the magistrate reads the charge in dry, officious Latin. He doesn't even flinch. This is routine. Florence has whole magistracies devoted to prosecuting sodomy, the office of the night. You remember they weren't shy. Thousands of trials, young apprentices naming older men, lovers betrayed under torture. The city needed scapegoats and money. Fines filled civic coffers. You see the accused tremble as testimony piles up. Neighbors claim they saw him with boys. Servants whisper about payments for silence. Punishments vary: heavy fines, public humiliation, exile, in rare cases, execution. You hear the notary note the man's confession. Perhaps he confessed from guilt or to avoid torture. Elsewhere in Europe it's the same. In France, men burned alive. In England, hung. In Spain, priests fulminate about Sodom, while kings use the charges to blackmail rivals. You step outside the hall, shivering. The piazza is dark, empty but for stray dogs. You wonder how many loved quietly, in fear, and how many denounced others to save themselves. You kneel on the cold stone floor of a small village church in 11th century England. The priest opens a battered, soot-stained book, a penitential. He reads in solemn Latin, pausing to translate into halting English. Who lies with a woman not his wife, 7 years penance on bread and water. You bow your head as he continues. If a man spills seed by himself, 3 years penance. He coughs. If with a man, 10 years. You see the villagers shuffling, embarrassed. No sin is too small to catalogue. Penitentials are meticulous. Irish monks wrote the earliest, listing every possible transgression in lurid detail. Continental versions spread like wildfire, filling confessionals with shame. You recall one old rule: if a woman mounts her husband to lie with him, 3 years penance. Another, if they perform the deed standing, 1 year. Priests read them aloud, assigning penance with the precision of a merchant tallying debts. But enforcement was uneven. A rich man might pay to commute his penance. A peasant might simply ignore it, too busy surviving. You hear the priest close the book with a thud. He whispers about mercy, about God's forgiveness. But you see fear in the villagers' eyes. Outside, the wind moans through grave markers, and you wonder how many lay awake at night counting sins like coins. You sit cross-legged on the floor of a cramped Venetian bookshop. Dust motes swirl in candlelight. The merchant, plump and sweating, unlocks a chest and offers you a slim, battered volume. It's written in the vernacular, not for priests or scholars. A book of secrets. You turn the pages carefully. It claims to teach everything. Aphrodisiacs, contraceptives, fertility charms, even recipes for love potions. One page describes mixing honey with ginger and pepper to inflame the blood. Another gives a recipe to dry the womb using rue and pennyroyal. You stifle a laugh at the earnest instructions on proper positions to ensure conception. Elsewhere in Italy, these books sell quietly under counters. They're popular with midwives, curious merchants' wives, even giggling apprentices. Authorities hate them. Church officials condemn them as immoral, but they sell. You see marginalia in another copy, notes in a woman's hand. Does this work? Dangerous? You wonder if she tried it. Some texts are translations of Arabic treatises passed through Salerno. Others are folk recipes, repeated for generations. A magistrate once burned a whole bundle in Bologna's piazza, but the next month the books were back on sale. You thank the merchant and slip the book into your cloak. Outside, Venice is dark, canals gleaming under torchlight. You wonder how many secrets floated across those waters, and how many learned more than they bargained for. You stand in the flickering firelight of a cold alpine hall. A magistrate hunches over a table, quill scratching. A woman sobs on the floor. Shackles bite her ankles. She's accused of witchcraft. You listen as they interrogate her. At first she denies everything, but under threat, sometimes worse, she confesses. She says she lay with the devil. It's the standard script. Witchcraft manuals teach inquisitors exactly what to ask. Did he seduce you? Did you kiss his rear? Did you fornicate with him? You see the clerk's face blank as he writes it all down. Elsewhere in Europe, these trials multiply. The Malleus Maleficarum demands confessions of sexual sin with demons. Women say anything to stop the pain. You remember reading records from Germany, where old widows described spectral lovers. In France, girls insisted the devil forced them in dreams. Some believed it themselves, shaped by sermons that taught them women were weak, lustful, prone to temptation. You watch the magistrate nod gravely, asking about the Sabbat, about orgies, about potions to seduce men. The woman sobs harder. Punishments are brutal. Burning, hanging, exile. But the sexual detail is always there, the obsession. You step out into the freezing courtyard, breath steaming in the dark. You wonder how many truly believed in demons and how many just needed someone to blame. You're standing at the edge of a bustling market square in York. The smell of roasting meat mixes with wet straw underfoot. Bells ring for mass, but the crowd gathers here, drawn by the promise of shame. At the church steps, a young couple kneels, heads bowed. She clutches a candle nearly as tall as her arm. He shifts uncomfortably in a thin tunic despite the biting wind. They've been caught fornicating. You hear the priest intone their sin in Latin before translating into the vulgar tongue. Every ear strains to hear. Gossip will spread like fire on dry thatch. Public penance is both punishment and theatre. You notice the woman's mother watching from the back, face stony with humiliation. A boy snickers nearby, getting cuffed for it by his father. The priest instructs them to process around the church 3 times, barefoot on icy cobbles, candles in hand. They mumble prayers, cheeks red with cold and shame. Elsewhere in Europe, penance varies. In France, adulterers wear coarse shirts marked with crosses. In Castile, some are forced to sit by the church door for every Sunday Mass for a month, heads bowed for all to see. Records show nobles paying to skip it. Peasants rarely have that luxury. You see the priest pause to admonish the crowd. Do not laugh, he warns. This is their salvation, but even he can't keep the smirk from his lips. You notice the woman stumble, the flame guttering. She writes it with shaking fingers. It's supposed to cleanse them, but you wonder how many see it as simple humiliation, a warning to others. You feel the wind sting your face as the bells toll again, and you wonder how many walked that path, and how many simply learned to be more careful next time. You stand in a stinking leper hospital on the edge of medieval Paris. The door groans shut behind you. Herbs and smoke barely mask the reek of rotting flesh. A priest stands at a rude wooden altar. Before him, 2 figures kneel, cloaked head to toe. They're lepers. They want to marry. You watch the priest lift his hands, blessing them in solemn Latin. His voice trembles, not from pity, but fear. Marriage is permitted for lepers. The church never banned it outright. Even they have the right to the marital bond. But consummation? That's another question. Some dioceses required them to promise chastity. Others allowed limited contact, fearing spread of disease. Records show leper couples writing to bishops for permission to share a bed. You see the groom's hand shake as he offers the ring. It's a scrap of twisted wire. The bride's fingers are bandaged, but she accepts. You recall French ordinances forcing lepers to carry clappers or bells so others can avoid them. Marrying means 2 outcasts joining their misery, but also finding a strange companionship. You hear the priest say they must live apart from the healthy, in a house of their own, a small mercy in a world that fears them. Outside, the city turns away. Few care what happens in these lazar houses. But tonight they'll share bread, light one candle together, speak words of hope, even in ruin. You step out into the winter fog, and you wonder how many found tenderness in the dark, even as the world called them cursed. You stand in the Grand Council Hall of Florence. Murals of saints glare down at wealthy men arguing over cloth. A clerk reads the new sumptuary law aloud. Women are forbidden from wearing silk beyond a certain width. No ermine trim, no gold embroidery on sleeves. Widows must wear black or grey. The goal, they claim, is to limit vanity, to preserve moral order. But you hear the subtext. It's about controlling desire. Sumptuary laws often mention preventing provocation. Too fine a gown might tempt men. Too bright a colour might encourage sin. You see the merchant's wife bristle as her husband agrees to the law. She knows it's aimed at her. Elsewhere in Europe, similar edicts flourish. In England, prostitutes must wear stripes. In Spain, sumptuary laws ban jewelled headdresses for all but the nobility. You recall one Florentine statute forbidding women to own more than one necklace of pearls. It claims extravagance ruins families, leads to debts, and worse, seduction. But it's not only vanity they fear, it's independence. Women with wealth buy freedom, draw eyes, make their own choices. You watch as a tailor's apprentice jokes that he'll go out of business. No one laughs. Outside, you see women whisper in the street. Some will obey, others will bribe officials, some will simply defy the rules. You follow one young woman home. She sews hidden brocade into her hem. She'll risk the fine. You hear her mother warn her softly, "Don't make them notice you." And you wonder how much sin lived in the gown and how much in the watching eyes. You're in a cold, echoing ecclesiastical courtroom in 14th century Aragon. A bishop sits high in judgment, robes rustling. A man stands trembling. His wife sits across from him, face pale and drawn. She's petitioning for annulment on grounds of non-consummation. You lean in as clerks record every word. She claims he's impotent, that the marriage is invalid. He stammers denials, offers to prove himself. You watch the bishop sigh heavily. Church law demands proof. In France, they might order trial by Congress, a supervised attempt at intercourse with matrons watching. Elsewhere, a panel of physicians examines the man, checking for defects. Humiliating. Here, they'll question servants about stained sheets, ask neighbours if they heard wedding noises. The woman's mother testifies she never saw blood on the bridal linens. The man's friend claims the husband bragged about conquest. It's theatre, painful and public. You see the man beg for privacy. The bishop shakes his head. This is the cost of marriage. Canon law is clear, no consummation, no marriage. Outside the courtroom, gossip flies. You remember reading court rolls full of these cases. Some ended in annulment, freeing spouses to remarry. Others forced together despite misery. You see the wife cry as the verdict is read. The marriage is dissolved. She leaves quickly, head high. The man collapses on a bench, shaking, and you wonder how many learned to lie well enough, and how many broke under the shame. You sit in the gloom of a medieval confessional. The wooden lattice is worn smooth where hundreds have pressed their faces, whispered sins. The priest coughs softly, asks if you're ready. You nod. He begins the questions, voice low but firm. Have you lain with anyone not your spouse? You hesitate. Have you lain with your spouse on forbidden days? You clear your throat. Did you take pleasure beyond necessity? Your face burns. He continues remorselessly. Did you use unnatural positions? Spill seed outside its place? Touch yourself? You stammer. He writes in a ledger. Confessors followed guides, manuals that listed sins in detail. Irish penitentials, French confessional books. They demanded thorough inquiry. You remember reading a line advising priests to press reluctant penitents, for shame makes them lie. Some priests asked gently, others bullied. He gives you penance, bread and water, prayers, alms to the poor. You step from the box dizzy, relieved. Outside the wind is sharp. You see others in line, heads bowed. You wonder how many lied outright, how many felt relief at confessing, and how many walked away promising to change, only to return next week with the same sins. You stand at the edge of a great hall in 12th century Aquitaine. Torches sputter in sconces, throwing shadows over tapestries of knights and ladies. A troubadour strums a lute, voice soft as velvet. He sings of love, not of duty or dowry, but of yearning, adulterous, forbidden, exquisite in its pain. You watch the lady of the castle lean forward, face illuminated. Her lord, older and rough, snores drunkenly at the high table. Courtly love, they call it. It is a game, but also deadly serious. Poets teach that true love must be secret, impossible, elevating. A lady inspires by being unattainable. A knight proves himself through devotion, service, sighs. You see her slip the troubadour a ring, a promise, a dare. Elsewhere in the hall, noblemen joke about seductions. Pages run messages between lovers, handkerchiefs, lockets, coded words. You remember André Le Chapelin's treatise laying out the rules. Love cannot exist between husband and wife. It thrives on barriers. But these barriers could be fatal. You've read letters seized by jealous husbands, witnesses forced to testify about glances and secret meetings. Adultery was a sin, punished harshly in law. Yet entire courts revelled in the pretense of longing. You hear a priest nearby mutter that such songs are poison. He preaches confession for those who even think lustful thoughts. But the music continues. You see a knight close his eyes as the refrain speaks of a lady's white throat, her soft sigh. You step out into the courtyard where crickets sing under the moon, and you wonder how many lived and died on whispered promises. How many found in those games a brief, dangerous taste of freedom? You find yourself in a small, smoky chamber at the edge of a medieval village. A single tallow candle burns low, its light wavering over a narrow bed. A married couple lies side by side. They're not young. Their hair is threaded with grey. They speak in hushed tones. They worry about taxes, about their surviving children, about the priest's warnings, and then they fall silent. You watch them reach for each other, tentatively at first. They know the rules, not on holy days, not in certain positions, not with too much laughter or joy, but tonight they choose to forget. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, the church bells are silent, no one is watching. They kiss like they did when they were young. Their hands explore familiar territory. They share warmth against the cold. It is not poetry or courtly love. It is survival, comfort, a promise renewed. You think of all the prohibitions, the sermons, the laws, the fines, the shame, the public penance. None of it here. Just two people in the dark, deciding to be human for a moment. You notice the candle gutter, wax spilling onto rough wood. The last light fades, and you listen to the soft sounds of breathing, the creak of the bed. You step back into the shadows, leaving them their privacy, and you realize that for all the rules, this moment was the truth no law could erase. Outside, dawn is still far off, and you whisper goodnight, letting the chill of the past wrap around you like a blanket. You close your eyes, imagining the hush of sleeping villages, the secrets kept behind wooden doors, the promises made in darkness. Drift now, settle in. Because history has no end, only quiet confessions in the night.